And I was 18. And that's when I became part of the military.
And how did you become part of the military? Did you volunteer? You were drafted?
Yes. I went out and I volunteered. And I was to go out with the next group. And when I went down to the induction center, institutional racism smacked me right in the face, because the sergeant was there and he told me to go one way when I went through the door, and he told my white friends to go another way, because my country promoted institutional racism. And the military was one of the largest to do just that. And so I went into an all-black unit, save for the officers. They were white. But all of my comrades in arms at that time were black.
When you enlisted, did you realize the military was segregated?
I had, you hear, but you don't even think about those things until it hits you in the face. And when it becomes a reality and you see how stark the whole thing is, the contrast, you begin to wonder. And of course, the thing that made it more real, more painful, was the fact that they sent us south. They sent me and those who came in with me down to Georgia. We went to Camp Wheeler, Georgia for infantry basic training. And I worked on the red clay of Georgia for 3 or 4 months trying to be a good soldier. And I had some experiences that were very denigrating, I mean, really put down kind of things, both in the military and both in town. And after the 3 or 4 months there, we were told that we don't need infantry soldiers any longer. We're going to make you combat engineers. So we had to start basic training all over again. And so we had to leave Camp Wheeler. And of all places, they sent us to Mississippi. So things got worse. And we spent quite a time in Mississippi, right in Camp McCain, near Grenada. We spent almost a year there. And we went on maneuvers into Texas, to Louisiana, and we came back to Little Rock, Arkansas, Camp Joseph T. Robinson. Now, in all these places, I was given the message of who and what I was as far as the society was concerned. And it was rather frustrating to think that you have made a commitment to your country, and yet your country is saying to you, all right, you're okay, but only so far.
A veritable campaign in the Confederacy is what they gave you.
That's right. They sent us right into the heart of the place where people would, there would be a confrontation. If not verbally and physically, at least mentally, you would have this confrontation. I went into Macon, Georgia, and attempted to get a drink of water while I was in there. A simple thing like a drink of water. Because you walk around the town and you see it, it's a beautiful place. And you walk around, you want to see things, and all of a sudden you see the fountain and you go to drink. And coming from Philadelphia, I had no indication that you follow the signs. And I went to drink, and someone grabbed me and said, "Boy, you don't drink here." And he pointed to the sign which said white, and directed me to another sign which said colored, where was another fountain.
And you were, of course, in uniform at the time this happened.
Oh, yes, I was a soldier. Like all the other black soldiers, we were all experiencing this, and we reacted differently. I was rather quiet and introverted and took my hurt internally. Others would say and do things that got them into trouble and very great difficulty.
Was it your perception, though, that the black troops generally, though, fully understood the fact that while the rhetoric of the war against Nazi racism and so forth was fine, in practice the country was doing something entirely different?
Oh, yes. It was as though you were schizophrenic. Our country was two personalities, you know. One way we may make the wonderful pronouncements, you know. We talk about our Judeo-Christian ethics, and we're going to make the world a better place for democracy and all that other jazz. But then when you cut down to the real thing and you start seeing the way they operate, no, things were not in consonance. And so I began to be an angry, frustrated young black soldier. I guess at that time I had such strong memories of what I discovered when I went down to Weimar. We went to Weimar and set up our bivouac area, and then went immediately with an officer, about 5 of us. We were in the intelligence reconnaissance section of our unit, and we went right to Buchenwald. And that was the day that I was to discover what had really been going on in Europe under the Nazis, because I walked through the gates and I saw walking dead people. Seriously, walking dead people. I am not a doctor. I cannot assess things that accurately, but in just looking at these people who were skin and bone and dressed in those pajama-type uniforms, their heads clean shaved and filled with sores due to malnutrition. And here they were coming towards us, making all kinds of guttural statements and using their own language. And it was very difficult for me to comprehend what was going on. I just looked at this in amazement, and I said to myself, you know, my God, you know, who are these people? What have they done? What was their crime? You know, it's hard for me to try to understand why anybody could have been treated this way. I don't care what they had done. It just didn't grab me. And I didn't have any way of thinking or putting a handle on it, no frame of reference. I was only 20. And so this young man who spoke English began to tell us about Buchenwald.
An inmate?
Yes,
Prisoner?
yes. He had not been there, I guess, as long as others. He seemed to be in better condition, but he spoke perfect English. And he was Polish. And so he began to explain to us the composition of this place, that these people were Jews and gypsies, and they were trade unionists and communists and homosexuals and Jehovah's Witnesses. There were some Catholics. There had been some mental defectives, but they were gone. He went through a litany of groups and names of groups saying that these people had been incarcerated here because they, if I could use the term I used before, they weren't good enough, you see. And they had been put here for one purpose, and that was to be worked until they died, starved until they died. And I walked around the camp. I went to a barracks. I opened a door. I wanted to go in, but the stench came out. And there was no way in the world I was going to get through that overpowering odor. And so I just stood there, and I looked down on the bottom bunk right near the door, and there was a man there. He was skin and bone. And he was on something like a pallet of dirty straw and filthy rags. And he just could barely turn his head and look up at me. And I looked into his face, into that skeletal face with those deep-set eyes, which I can't forget. But he said nothing, and I said nothing to him. And one day I came to a classroom, and in that classroom there was a lady, and she was trying to talk to the young men who were not listening to her. You know, they were doing everything but listening. And I stood at the door, and then I began to realize that she was a survivor. And she had survived one of the worst camps. She had survived Auschwitz. And she was here today, on this particular day, to share her experience, her pain, if you will. And these young men were not listening. They had their own pain, you know. And I understood that, you know, the pain of rejection, the pain of not being given the kind of recognition you deserved. I understood all of that. I had been through there. And I knew their pain, but I also knew her pain. And so I had to say to them, hold it, fellas, cool it. Listen, what she says is true. I was there. And so they got quiet for a while. And once she started telling her account of what happened at Auschwitz, they really listened. And she told them how she lost her grandmother, grandfather, her parents, brothers, sisters, cousins, all those near and dear who had come into that camp. All of them had gone to the gas chambers and had ended up in the ovens. And of her family, she was the only one that came out of there. And they listened. She shared with them so much. And they asked her questions, which made me know that she had to reach them. And they came up and looked at the numbers tattooed on her arm, and they thanked her. And they did something I hadn't been done in a long while. They left that room in silence. And of course she turned to me, and of course tears were coming down her face. And she thanked me for my intervention and wanted to know more about my experience at Buchenwald. And I began to remember.
Was this the first time you had talked publicly to
First
anyone?
time I had told anyone that I had been at Buchenwald. Not my mother, not my family, my children. No one knew that I had been there. And I had no reason to bring it back, I felt, until this day when she pushed a button. She was the catalyst, I guess. And I said I'd seen it. It's the first time I acknowledged that I'd seen it. And then when she started talking to me, I could recount it all. She said, now, would you share that with others? And I didn't realize that we had a Holocaust Council in the city, so she had me come down and talk to them. And they had me on a program one evening with Rabbi Schachter from Brooklyn. I remember him. He, too, was a liberator of Buchenwald. And the two of us sat up there, and then we recounted to the public what we had seen on that day. And after that, I've been talking about it ever since. It's why I come out to places and share. I've been sharing since, I guess, 1970, this must have been, that I went to the council, and I've been all over the country, from Canada to Boston, Mass, everywhere, universities, high school. Anyone that will listen and invites me, I'll go and talk and tell them. Because there are people out there who are saying it didn't happen. The revisionists who, for their own purposes, are trying to say, look, this was not as bad as it was. And I find it hard to fathom their thinking. But I know it did happen. And so I don't want them to push it under the rug like they did slavery. You know, in slavery, I went all through school and knew nothing about that institution and its horrors until I became an adult at the graduate school, that I found out all the things about slavery that made me most aware of the horrors of that institution that pulled out 40 million souls for free labor all over the world. We had our 4 million here in this country. And look what it did to us. Racism has just about split us so many different ways till we can't live in harmony with one another. Suspicious. All of this I discovered as an adult. And I didn't get it when I was young, when I should have had it, because people didn't want to deal with it. It was an ugly side of our history, and ugly things we want to push under the rug. We don't want to deal with it. And I'm saying to people today, you must face it. You can't laundry and sanitize our history. You must take history with its beauty, and you must take it with its degradation. You've got to deal with it for us to be whole human beings and to make a difference. And this is especially true with young people. And so I go around telling my story, and of course I get the people saying, Leon, what are you dealing with this? This is not a black problem. Why? I said, hey, it's not a black problem. It's not a white problem. It's a human problem. And we've got to face it. And as Dr. King says, injustice anywhere is a loss of justice everywhere, you see. Words to that effect. And it's true. What affects you affects me. Your pain has to be my pain, and my pain has to be your pain. And I must somehow convey that to the young people that I come to. It's my commitment. And somebody says, why do you deal with that mess? You know, I said, I'm sorry. I know it's been 40-some years, but that doesn't make it go away. It only makes us become more aware that we today have to do something to stop that which created the final solution. And that something is racism. Really, racism is at the root of all of this. Under that umbrella comes bigotry and prejudice and discrimination, unemployment, people who are unemployable, large institutions filled with those who are drug addicts and those who are criminals, all because somehow we have come to grips with that institution called racism. And we have to, because we see the ultimate of racism, which was what I saw at Buchenwald. And so what do? Do we as educators, and I use it in the broadest sense because we're all teachers of the young, in our way of life, do we convey to them the best that we can be, or do we give them the worst side that we have? Do we promote racism through our apathy, when we hear and see things, we say nothing, because we don't want to jeopardize that which is important to us, our investment in a job, our investment among friends. We don't want to disturb our family. So no matter what people say or do, just leave it alone. Sweep it under the rug, and somehow it'll go away. But the skinheads are with us. The Klan is with us. It may be dressed in Brooks Brothers suit with attaché cases. They may be in doctors. They may be lawyers. They may be the guy who drives the bus. But they're still with us. Some may not say anything, but somehow those of us who are aware, and when we see and hear the evil that comes out, that would make us less than what we should be, then we have to dare to be that Daniel. You know, we have to stand up and face it. And somehow, you're going to pay a price. You know, it's not easily done. Somebody said, Leon, you come here with these pronouncements and platitudes about the racism. But, you know, that's tough. I said, look, I didn't come to give you a rose garden. You know, I'm planting one. I come here to give you the unvarnished truth. If you dared to go to your synagogue and to your church and to your mosque or wherever you go, and then you learn all about your Judeo-Christian ethics, you know, the Sermon on the Mount or the Ten Commandments, the Torah, whatever, and you take all of these wonderful tenets and you come back to your job or your school or wherever, and you tend to practice them. You want to put them into operation. Hey, you become vulnerable. You can be had. You're going to get your lumps. But there's no other way. We have to be courageous enough. We must have that something deep down inside us to say, this I believe and this is where I stand, and I will do it. And we answer that question by looking in the mirror, not at each other, but in the mirror, and say, is the price too high? I think not. I think the price is not too high. And I always tell the people when I close my talk to them, I always close it with the words of James Baldwin, who said, either we love one another, either we hold to one another, or that sea will engulf us and the light will go out.
I can only say this, Leon. There is a Hebrew word, chazak, which means be strong. I hope you continue to be strong and do what you're doing.
I'll keep the faith, whatever that is.
Thank you very much.
Plain English, thank you very, very much.
My pleasure, gentlemen.